get along with everyone on the Golden Girls? I mean,
Oh, yes.
You did?
Oh, yes. B was not that fond of me, but
Yeah,
I
why
loved...
no? I've heard that.
I don't know.
What is
I don't
that
know what
about?
I ever did. I don't know, but she was not that thrilled with me.
For many fans of the Golden Girls, the mid-'80s marked the start of a lifelong obsession. Though the show wasn't expected to succeed, viewers quickly embraced the simple sitcom about four older women sharing a home. Almost overnight, it became a cultural force. Audiences loved the effortless humor, sharp timing, and a cast that seemed bonded for decades, yet every bright set casts shadows, and this one was no exception. Behind the polished jokes were complicated dynamics, quiet resentments, and pressures hidden from the public. At the center stood Betty White, bright, sharp, and adored. As she grew older, she reflected on her years in that iconic house, hinting at moments the show never revealed. What truly happened there? The accidental hit show. When NBC first looked at the pitch for the Golden Girls, it didn't scream hit. In fact, the idea of building a primetime sitcom around four women over 50 felt almost absurd in an industry obsessed with youth, romance, and glossy 20-something leads. To put it plainly, it was a crazy idea. And although the executives were polite, they remained doubtful. At the time, the safest prediction was that the show might survive a season, maybe two, before fading quietly from the schedule. But television has a funny way of surprising the people who think they've figured it out. And this was one of those moments. Things first began to change when the network got the script for the pilot. It didn't read like just another sitcom. Instead, it made the network laugh a rare, honest laugh. The story follows the lives of four women in their golden years who decide to live together in a house in Miami. Here, they find companionship and laughter in each other's company. Over the course of the series, all four women, Dorothy, Sophia, Blanche, and Rose, confront a wide range of life's challenges, including dating in later years, navigating career changes, coping with loss, and addressing social issues like ageism, illness, and loneliness. Yet no matter the obstacle, they support each other through laughter, arguments, and heartfelt conversations, turning a shared house into a home filled with warmth. To many execs, there was something about the writing, sharp without being cruel, and playful without oozing emotional weight. With the perfect cast, the show was definitely bound to be a hit. After it was greenlit, conversations surrounding the casting soon began, and this was when everything shifted. Who would be the perfect actors to play four humorous and entertaining women? Enter Betty White, Rue McClanahan, B. Arthur, and Estelle Getty. Four women with completely different personalities, temperaments, and histories, each with careers long enough to fill a museum wall. It seemed impossible at first. How likely was it that these women with different personalities and levels of experience would blend perfectly? Turns out, it was possible. As the weeks rolled by, the ladies formed a combination so unexpected that even the crew didn't realize what they were witnessing at first. But here's where the story takes a turn. While viewers saw instant chemistry, inside the rehearsal room things didn't click right away. The thing is, these actresses weren't newcomers fighting for the spotlight. They were seasoned pros with their own rhythms, instincts, and ways of working. Betty, fresh off the success of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, carried the kind of cheerful discipline that made directors love her. B. Arthur, famous for her commanding presence and dry wit, approached scenes with surgical precision. Then there was Rue McClanahan, warm and expressive, who thrived on spontaneity. And Estelle Getty, the least experienced of the four, struggled quietly with the pace of television production. It might not have looked like it on TV, but in the early days, these women weren't the perfectly packaged sisterhood fans assumed. They respected one another, yes. They admired each other's craft, absolutely. But they were also four very different women thrown into an intense environment, asked to deliver comedic perfection under tight deadlines, and that pressure brought out contrasts the public never saw. For Betty, this period was kind of a test. She had walked into the project thinking it would be fun, challenging, yes, but mostly fun. What she wasn't expecting was the internal friction that came with pairing strong personalities who weren't afraid to speak their minds. On the surface, she glowed, punctual, prepared, unfailingly polite. Behind the scenes, she had to navigate moments where her natural optimism clashed with colleagues who found constant cheerfulness grating rather than comforting. The most notable tension was the unspoken one between Betty and B. Arthur. Although many thought it was a feud, it wasn't quite that dramatic. It was simply a mismatch of energies that pulsed underneath their interactions. B was dry, sarcastic, and guarded. Betty was open, sunny, and sharp in a way that could be mistaken for naivety. Put those two approaches in the same workspace for 12 hours a day, and you get sparks, even if no one intends for them to fly. Regardless, the cameras rolled, the writing stayed strong, and something remarkable began to happen. Despite their differences, the four women created scenes that felt effortless. They argued off-camera, but on-camera. Magic! And as the audience grew, so did the expectations. Suddenly, the show NBC never believed in was pulling in massive ratings and earning Emmy nominations like clockwork. But the truth is, success comes with its own shadows. Estelle's early struggles with memorizing lines became more noticeable. Betty often stepped in to help her rehearse privately. Offering patience when the pressure was too high, Rue tried to keep the atmosphere light, even when long hours drained everyone's energy. And B, whose barbed humor was legendary, often retreated into silence between takes, conserving her emotional bandwidth for the performance itself. Through it all, Betty maintained her composure, even when it cost her. She once hinted that being the upbeat one wasn't always easy, and that sometimes her positivity was more armor than genuine mood. But she kept showing up, kept hitting her marks, kept being the glue even when the pieces around her didn't always fit neatly. By the end of the first season, something undeniable had formed, and Betty was quietly becoming the heart of it. Betty wasn't the first choice. It might surprise you to know, but Betty wasn't actually the network's first choice. And no, it wasn't because she wasn't experienced. Long before the Golden Girls ever placed her in a pastel blouse and dropped her into the fictional town of St. Olaf, she was already a force. Her career stretched back to the earliest years of television, so early that she was often introduced as the girl who practically grew up inside the TV screen. By the time she walked onto Stage 5 to play Rose, she had weathered enough industry changes, cancellations, reinventions, and comebacks to fill 3 lifetimes. And that history shaped how she moved through the set, how she handled conflict, and how she carried herself when the spotlight wasn't so soft. So why then did the producers not want her for the role? Well, the truth is, Rose wasn't originally written for Betty. In fact, the producers considered swapping roles between Betty and Rue. Betty would play the seductive Blanche, and Rue would take on the sweet, guileless Rose. It might not make sense to you now, but back then, it made sense on paper. Betty had played the man-eating Sue Ann Nivens for years and was flawless at it. But the thing is, that role would have been too perfect for Betty, almost expected even. So, at the very last moment, the creators went with a twist. They decided to place Betty in a role that forced her out of familiar territory. Just like that, Betty had to play the cheerful, innocent Rose Neeland, a character that didn't initially come naturally to her. What the audience saw was a lovable, slightly scatterbrained woman whose stories about St. Olaf were so bizarre, they felt like fairy tales told by someone who didn't realize they were strange. What Betty had to deliver, week after week, was precision disguised as simplicity. The timing had to be exact. The tone had to be naive, but never foolish. The comedy had to land gently, not forcefully. And the emotional beats, Rose's loneliness, her late husband Charlie, her insecurities, had to feel real beneath all the humor. That pressure alone was a challenge, but what made it heavier was how different the role forced Betty to act in comparison to her natural personality. Rose rambled. Betty was concise. Rose was perpetually confused. Betty was sharp, almost academically quick. Rose floated. Betty anchored. So, for the first time in years, Betty found herself working harder than she expected on a character people assumed came naturally. And yet, even with the struggle, Betty delivered. She delivered so consistently, so flawlessly, that directors often leaned on her to keep difficult scenes on track. If someone forgot a line, if the energy dipped, if the room needed a lift, Betty stepped in, not by taking over, but by setting a steady rhythm others could latch onto. She was, in every sense, a stabilizer. But behind the scenes, as the seasons rolled on and the actresses settled into their rhythms, the differences in working style grew more noticeable. Betty, who approached every rehearsal with bright enthusiasm, unknowingly rubbed certain cast members the wrong way. She had the kind of sunny professionalism that could feel overwhelming to someone who didn't operate on that wavelength. Bea, for instance, had a humor that leaned toward the dry and sardonic. She wasn't loud or bubbly. She was thoughtful, meticulous, and guarded. And while the two women respected each other deeply, their temperaments clashed in ways subtle enough to escape the audience, but strong enough to shift the atmosphere off camera. The irony was that Betty admired Bea enormously. She once said Bea's timing was mathematical, almost like watching a master craftsman. But Bea, painfully honest by nature, sometimes viewed Betty's optimism as a performance rather than a personality trait. Their differences weren't dramatic blow-ups, more like quiet disruptions, the kind that linger in the background and require constant navigation. Betty navigated them gracefully, but she wasn't untouched by them. In a few interviews late in life, she hinted that she sometimes felt misunderstood, that her positivity was interpreted as naivety, when in reality it was her coping mechanism, her way of easing tension rather than adding to it. She walked onto that set every day determined to make the environment as smooth as possible, especially for Estelle, who battled anxiety and memory issues that grew more difficult with each season. And then there was the media. From the moment the show became a phenomenon, reporters loved painting the cast as inseparable friends. Four women bound by sisterhood, laughing their way through every episode. Betty rarely corrected them. Not because she wanted to maintain an illusion, but because she believed the truth didn't take away from the final product. The show felt like friendship, because the work reflected something real, even if the off-screen dynamics were more complicated. And as the seasons went on, that balancing act would only grow heavier. The quiet storms on set. If you ask longtime crew members what the set of The Golden Girls felt like, they'll often say the same thing. It depended on the day. Some mornings were filled with real, loud laughter that spilled out of the kitchen set and echoed through the soundstage. Other days, the air held a tension that wasn't hostile, but thick enough that everyone became a little more careful with their words. And somewhere in the middle of all that shifting energy was Betty, doing her best to keep things steady while managing her own emotional load. From the outside, the show looked like a constant party. The kitchen table scenes were so natural, viewers swore the actresses were improvising, but the truth was more layered. Betty was always ready before call time, script in hand, lines memorized. Rue brought a playful warmth, but could become flustered if a scene wasn't landing. Bea held herself with a quiet intensity, analyzing every beat, every pause, every breath. And Estelle, though brilliant, had her struggles with anxiety, especially in front of the live audience those differences turned rehearsals into a delicate dance. Betty, with her upbeat encouragement, tried to smooth over rough patches. But what she saw as helpful could sometimes come across as excessive to those who preferred quiet Focus B, who loved structure, didn't always appreciate Betty's habit of chatting during breaks or filling silences with optimism. Rue could oscillate between both sides, depending on her mood that day, and Estelle simply tried to stay afloat. The first major shift in the atmosphere came when Estelle's memory lapses became more noticeable. She would freeze mid-scene, panic flickering across her face, and Betty would instantly step in, running lines with her, grounding her, whispering gentle reminders. Over time, those lapses deepened, and helping her required more patience than anyone had anticipated. Betty never complained, never hesitated. She carried some of that weight quietly, absorbing the stress to make things easier for Estelle. But not everyone handled the situation the same way B, who adored Estelle but struggled with unpredictability, often grew frustrated at the situation, not at the woman. B needed precise timing to feel confident in a scene, and when that timing slipped, she withdrew into herself. She could go whole afternoons speaking only when necessary, retreating into that protective shell that many mistook for anger. Betty, whose instinct was to comfort, sometimes stepped into that space at the wrong moment. And although she saw it as kindness, B interpreted it as interference. Their intentions were different, but their goals were the same. Keep the show together, keep it excellent, keep it worthy of the audience that loved it. Rue, meanwhile, moved like a breeze between storms. She adored Estelle and admired Betty, but she also understood B's need for space. When the atmosphere grew too heavy, Rue tried to lighten it, cracking jokes, exaggerating Blanche's southern charm, or sharing funny stories from her theater days. Sometimes it worked, other times it bounced off walls already strained by pressure. And then there was the unsaid truth. Every woman in that cast was dealing with something personal. B's son later explained that she lived with chronic discomfort, both emotional and physical, which made her sensitive to anything that felt chaotic. Rue endured health scares and romantic turbulence that often followed her to the set. Estelle worried constantly about being the weak link, even though no one ever described her that way. And Betty, despite her bright exterior, carried private grief from losing her husband Alan Ludden years earlier, a loss she never fully healed from, even as the world watched her smile. All of these undercurrents merged into an atmosphere that looked calm on camera, but rippled beneath the surface. And every ripple, no matter how small, affected Betty. She was the most outwardly approachable member of the cast, the one fans gravitated toward, the one magazines crowned America's sweetheart. But inside the studio walls, she had to walk a tightrope, staying cheerful without being performative, being supportive without overstepping, and protecting her own peace without dimming the light she was known for. Some days, that balance felt natural. Other days, it drained her. There were afternoons she would sit in her dressing room after a long taping, still in Rose's clothes, and take a breath before heading home, because she had spent the entire day absorbing the emotional pulse of the set. She admitted later that her optimism wasn't always effortless. Sometimes it was work. Yet, despite everything, something remarkable kept happening. The minute the cameras rolled, all four women clicked together like pieces of a puzzle that only made sense in the spotlight. Their differences didn't disappear. They transformed. And for Betty, that transformation was worth every complicated moment. The challenges behind the smile. Betty arrived on the Golden Girls set with decades of experience, a trailblazing career, and a reputation for charm. But even someone with her credentials couldn't escape the hurdles waiting behind the bright lights and pastel walls of the Miami set. To the audience, she was Rose Nyland, sweet, scatterbrained, endlessly optimistic off camera, though she was navigating a world that demanded both perfection and invisibility, an emotional tightrope that many fans never imagined. The first challenge was the character itself. Rose Nylund wasn't just a role, she was a study in contradictions. Betty had to embody innocence without being foolish, naivety without losing intelligence, warmth without slipping into saccharine territory. It was deceptively complex. In interviews, Betty admitted she had to actively stretch herself to inhabit Rose's rhythm and timing. Unlike her previous roles, this character required her to slow down, stumble through comedic beats deliberately, and embrace a level of vulnerability she hadn't practiced in years. It was an acting puzzle. Make it look effortless, but every nuance was meticulously calculated. Beyond the demands of Rose's character, however, Betty faced the subtle pressures of ageism and sexism in Hollywood. A show centered on women over 50 was groundbreaking, and executives weren't even entirely confident it would succeed. Critics assumed older women couldn't carry a prime-time sitcom, and studio conversations often reflected that bias. Betty had to prove, day after day, that experience was an asset, not a limitation. She often joked about the skepticism she faced, but behind her humor lay an acute awareness. Any misstep could reinforce stereotypes, and her professionalism had to be flawless to combat those assumptions. The dynamic of the cast added another layer of complexity. Betty's optimism sometimes clashed with the precision and dryness of B. Arthur, and although their differences weren't dramatic like we talked about earlier, they were subtle, psychological friction that could make tense days even longer. Betty later admitted that B's sharp, guarded personality occasionally made her feel misunderstood, despite the deep respect they had for each other. Rue, their mediator and friend, often helped smooth interactions, but Betty still had to navigate personality conflicts quietly, never letting them interfere with the performance. Then there was the challenge of working with Estelle. Although the effort was uncredited, invisible to viewers, it was vital to keeping the show on track. It was a form of emotional labor, one Betty accepted without complaint, but it added a weight few could see. Another challenge was the pressure of live audience filming. Golden Girls wasn't shot without people in the studio. While live laughter added energy, it also demanded precision. One missed line, one flub, could throw off the entire rhythm. For Betty, who was meticulous but also naturally buoyant, it meant balancing spontaneity with control. Her comedic timing had to be perfect, her delivery genuine, and her reactions believable, all while absorbing the subtle energy shifts of her co-stars, some of whom thrived on structure, others on improvisation. Then, there was also Betty's personal challenge of losing her husband. Even years later, the grief lingered, and Rose's storylines about love, loss, and loneliness occasionally touched nerve points. Nonetheless, Betty transformed her pain into empathy for her character, infusing Rose with warmth and depth that resonated across millions of households. And finally, the sheer physical and emotional stamina required was formidable. Long taping days, constant pressure to perform flawlessly, and navigating the cast's differing personalities could have been exhausting for anyone. Betty maintained a positive, professional exterior, often taking on additional emotional responsibilities, lifting others' spirits, keeping rehearsals calm, helping struggling co-stars, while continuing to deliver performances that appeared effortless. In truth, these challenges weren't fleeting, they persisted throughout the show's run. Betty carried the burden of expectation, the intricacies of her character, the responsibility of supporting her colleagues, and the unspoken pressures of a pioneering show all at once. And yet, she succeeded, turning every obstacle into a performance that felt light, joyful, and timeless. Behind the laughter and the cheesecake, behind the pastel sweaters and St. Olaf stories, was a woman managing weight invisible to the audience. Because Betty didn't just play Rose, she carried her world. And through those trials, she made it magical. But if you think you know all there is about the Golden Girls, wait until you hear about these little-known BTS facts. Little-known, behind-the-scenes facts. While audiences fell in love with the Golden Girls for its laughter, clever dialogue, and the warmth of its main characters, very little of what happened on the set ever made it to the public eye. Behind the pastel walls, the cameras, and the live audience, there was a world of unseen details, quirky traditions, and unexpected chaos that shaped the show. And Betty's experience, more than anyone realized. These were the stories that didn't appear in interviews, award speeches, or magazine spreads, yet they defined the rhythm, mood, and reality of the set. One of the most persistent challenges was the temperature on set. To keep the lighting perfect for filming, the studio was kept unusually cold. Actors often wore sweaters over their costumes between takes, but even then, long hours under bright studio lights in frigid air could be physically draining. Betty, always practical and quick to joke, reportedly carried scarves and light wraps just to stay comfortable, and she encouraged her co-stars to layer up. But despite the chill, she maintained her energy. Another behind-the-scenes quirk involved the live studio audience. While their laughter fueled the energy of the show, filming in front of hundreds of people added an unpredictable element to every scene. Audience reactions could fluctuate wildly, and the timing of jokes sometimes had to be adjusted on the fly. Betty, with her decades of live television experience, handled it with grace, often stepping in to redirect energy, subtly cue laughter, or adjust her delivery without breaking character. Crew members credited her with being the anchor that kept both the audience and the cast synchronized. Interestingly, food also played a curious role in shaping the set culture. Though it may sound trivial, the cast and crew had strong opinions about catering, timing, and snacks during breaks. Betty reportedly had a soft spot for simple, nourishing meals, and she often joked with the team about keeping Rose alive with fruit and soup. But these breaks weren't just about sustenance, they were small rituals that helped manage stress, maintain morale, and create micro-moments of camaraderie amid long, intense taping schedules. Rehearsals were another microcosm of unseen challenges. Each episode was first rehearsed in private, then in front of a small studio audience before the final take. In those private sessions, lines were rewritten, timing tweaked, and actors experimented with delivery. Betty was known to spend extra time perfecting her scenes, even staying after rehearsals to support Estelle with line memorization or to fine-tune comic beats. It wasn't glamorous work, but it made a significant difference in the cohesion of each episode. The sound of laughter itself became a subtle challenge. Unlike modern sitcoms with canned laugh tracks, the cast had to adjust to the ebb and flow of a live audience, gauging timing, pauses, and punchlines. Betty, ever attentive, sometimes had to subtly change inflection or pacing mid-take to align with spontaneous audience reactions. This level of adaptability required both skill and calm under pressure, something Betty seemed to embody effortlessly, even when others were thrown off. Wardrobe, too, was an unexpected source of behind-the-scenes drama. The show's pastel color palette was iconic, but the fabrics, costumes, and accessories often made movement cumbersome. Betty's wardrobe for Rose involved layers, bulky sweaters, and sometimes constricting skirts. Despite this, she had to move naturally, hit her marks, and maintain her comedic timing. All without drawing attention to the limitations of her costume. It was a subtle challenge, invisible to viewers, but one she mastered completely. And of course, there was the hidden emotional labor. Beyond physical and technical challenges, Betty consistently absorbed the moods, anxieties, and pressures of her castmates. She mediated minor conflicts, helped others cope with nerves, and even served as a morale booster when production slowed or frustrations rose. In a sense, she was the emotional linchpin, the one who made the behind-the-scenes friction manageable while keeping the magic intact for viewers. Even decades later, those who worked closely with her credit her ability to navigate the messiness, eccentricities, and demands of the set without losing her warmth. Betty's passing. In the final decade of her life, Betty experienced what many called a true renaissance. The public loved her more than ever, captivated not just by her enduring talent, but by the boundless energy, humor, and optimism she radiated well into her 90s. Her career saw a remarkable resurgence in the 2010s, a period now affectionately remembered as the Betty White Renaissance. She starred in Hot in Cleveland, delighting audiences with her comedic timing and proving that age could never dim her brilliance. She also appeared in Super Bowl commercials, became a viral favorite in social media campaigns, and even sparked a movement when fans rallied for her to host Saturday Night Live to the world. Betty wasn't only an actress, she had become a symbol of positivity and the possibility of living a long, joyful life. Betty herself approached her fame with characteristic humor. She often joked about mortality, never shying away from the subject. It's even the basis of one of her most famous lines, "I don't fear death, I just hope it's not today." For Betty, life was to be lived fully, with laughter as a constant companion and gratitude as a daily practice. Friends, co-stars, and fans alike marveled at how she managed to remain active, engaged, and genuinely enthusiastic about the world around her, even as she neared a century of life. In her final interviews, Betty expressed deep appreciation for her career, her family, and her fans, remarking that she had never felt more loved in her life. Her death came on December 31st, 2021, just 6 days shy of her 100th birthday. She passed peacefully in her sleep at her home, leaving the world stunned yet comforted by the calm nature of her departure. Her agent confirmed that Betty had died of natural causes, no illness, no dramatic final moments. "She simply fell asleep," he stated, underscoring the gentle, serene way her life concluded. The timing, in the quiet hours of New Year's Eve, felt almost poetic. A natural and dignified ending to an extraordinary life. The public response was immediate, and global tributes poured in from fans, co-stars, and fellow celebrities. Many taking to social media with messages like, "Heaven got a real one today." Her passing sparked an outpouring of collective memory. Iconic Rose Nyland lines, her Hot in Cleveland antics, her infectious laughter, all celebrated with reverence and affection. Plans for her 100th birthday tribute special continued, honoring not just her milestone, but the enduring joy, laughter, and love she had brought to generations. What's your favorite Betty White line? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.